Have you ever stopped to think about why you try so hard to be a good person? Why do you feel guilty when you say no, even when you know you should? The truth is, many of us have been conditioned from an early age to believe that pleasing others is a virtue, that being kind, understanding, and generous all the time is the right path. But what if that's not true? What if, by trying to appear like a good person all the time, you're silently sabotaging yourself? We live in a society where social approval has become almost a currency. Likes, compliments, acceptance, everything seems to revolve around maintaining a positive image. But what happens when this constant search distances us from who we really are? When it prevents us from making firm decisions, setting boundaries, and protecting what is important to us? This is where Niccolò Machiavelli comes in, a thinker that many avoid out of pure prejudice. Associated with coldness and manipulation, Machiavelli actually invites us to look at reality as it is, and not as we would like it to be. He shows us that there are times when trying to be good is, in practice, a dangerous choice. In this video, you will understand how Machiavellian thinking can help you free yourself from the need to please everyone, so you can live with more clarity, strength, and authenticity. We will talk about limits, strategies, and above all, how to stop putting yourself down in the name of superficial kindness. Before continuing, check if you are already subscribed to the channel. This ensures that you receive all the upcoming content that will help you think and act more autonomously. Now, let's get started. The social trap of acceptance. The need to be seen as good doesn't come out of nowhere. It's built brick by everything we hear, watch, and experience. From an early age, we learn that being liked is almost synonymous with being accepted, and that being accepted is what gives us value. At school, those who were kind to teachers and classmates were praised. At home, those who obeyed without question were considered well-mannered. At work, those who said yes to everything seemed more committed. On social media, those who avoid controversy and are always smiling are followed, liked, and celebrated more. This search for acceptance gradually becomes an automatic pattern of behavior. We do favors we don't want to do. We pretend to agree to avoid conflict. We give up strong opinions so as not to displease. And in many cases, we don't even realize how much this is costing us. The strangest thing is that even when we act this way, we don't always get what we want. Often, the more we try to please, the less we are respected. People start to notice that you are always available, always willing, always trying to be nice. And instead of valuing this, they take advantage of it. The trap is right there. You hide behind an image that you believe is acceptable, but you lose your own identity in the process. You live surrounded by people who like a fabricated version of you, and not your real essence. Machiavelli saw this with disconcerting clarity. He understood that human beings are deep down driven by interests, and that if you don't learn to assert your presence and your limits, you will be used as a pawn in someone else's game. Of course, this doesn't mean we should become cold or insensitive, but it does mean understanding that authenticity requires courage, and courage often requires accepting that you are misunderstood by those who expect you to be obedient or passive. You don't have to be cruel to be firm, but you do need to understand that pleasing everyone is an impossible task, and worse, undesirable. Because in the end, the more you try to fit into external expectations, the further away you are from a life with real meaning. In the next chapter, we will understand who Machiavelli was and why he has been so misunderstood throughout history. You will realize that his ideas were not an invitation to evil, but a call for lucidity, something that is sorely lacking when we are trapped in the need for acceptance. Machiavelli, a genius or a misunderstood villain. When we hear the name Machiavelli, what usually comes to mind is something like manipulation, coldness, or even evil. Expressions like Machiavellian are used to describe calculating, unscrupulous people. But does this image do justice to the real Niccolò Machiavelli? To understand his ideas, we must go back to the 16th century in Renaissance Italy. Machiavelli lived in Florence, a city marked by power struggles, political betrayals, and constant instability. It was in this context that he wrote his most famous work, The Prince. Unlike many thinkers of his time, Machiavelli was not concerned with the ideal of how the world should be. He wanted to understand how power actually worked. Instead of dreaming of virtuous leaders and just societies, He coldly observed human behavior, with all its contradictions, weaknesses, and games of interest. This is why the prince sounds so blunt, so uncomfortable. Machiavelli said things like, "It is better to be feared than loved, if it is not possible to be both." At first glance, this seems harsh, but look more closely, and it becomes clear that he was simply describing an uncomfortable reality. Good intentions are not always enough to maintain respect or control in a situation. He understood that to stay in power or make effective decisions, a leader could not rely solely on traditional morality. He had to be shrewd, knowing when to give in and when to act firmly. This does not mean being cruel for the sake of it. It does mean recognizing that naivety can be costly. The problem is that society has always preferred to believe in perfect heroes. That is why Machiavelli was labeled as dangerous. His ideas were rejected by many for centuries because they confronted the human desire to live in a bubble of idealism. But when we read The Prince carefully, what we find is an honest attempt to understand the game of life without filters. He does not propose an immoral life, but a lucid life, a life where decisions are made based on reality and not on the fear of disappointing others. And that's precisely why his ideas remain so relevant today. In a world where everyone seems concerned with appearances, likes, and acceptance, Machiavelli invites us to look beyond the surface. He reminds us that to live truthfully, we need to understand how the world really works, not how we wish it were. If this content is making sense to you so far, take advantage and leave your like. This helps the channel grow and shows me that you want more videos with this type of deep and direct reflection. In the next chapter, we'll see how this strategic vision applies especially to the figure of the nice guy leader, and why he's often the first to be discarded when things get tough. The myth of the nice guy leader and why it fails. If there is one figure that best represents the conflict between being good and being effective, it is the leader. Whether at work, in social groups, or even within the family, the nice leader is the one who tries to keep everyone happy. He avoids conflict, says yes to everything, makes constant concessions, and ironically, is almost never truly respected. Machiavelli once said, "The prince who always tries to be good in a world where many are not will end up destroyed." This phrase may sound harsh, but it describes a common scenario even today. When a person in a leadership position tries to please everyone all the time, he weakens himself, because leadership at its core is about making decisions, and real decisions always displease someone. The nice leader is afraid of being hated, and this fear makes him predictable and manipulable. He becomes the one everyone looks to when they want a favor, but the one no one listens to when he imposes a rule. He is always trading his authority in exchange for temporary acceptance. And the most tragic part? When things get tough, when the group faces a serious problem or crisis, this leader is the first to be discarded. Because in the end, people trust someone who is firm more than someone who is just nice. They may even like the nice leader, but they don't follow him with conviction. You've probably seen it happen before. The cool boss who no one respects, the charismatic teacher who loses control of the classroom, the parent who can't say no to their kids. They're not bad. They're just trapped in the illusion that pleasing is the same as leading. But leading requires something more: clarity, firmness, and above all, the courage to displease when necessary. This does not mean adopting an authoritarian or aggressive stance. True Machiavellian leadership, if we can call it that, is not cruel. It is conscious. It is the leadership of someone who understands that respect comes before friendliness, that being fair is better than being cute, and that often the best way to take care of a group is to make unpopular but necessary decisions. Machiavelli shows us that there is no virtue without effectiveness. Being a good person, in the deepest sense, is also being able to protect what matters, protecting your energy, your integrity, your decisions. And to do this, sometimes it is necessary to frustrate other people's expectations. A good modern example is that of business leaders or sports coaches who impose discipline and demands. At first they are criticized, but over time, when results appear, they are recognized as the ones responsible for success. They were not there to please, they were there to build. Now think, how many times have you failed to set a limit for fear of appearing rude? How many times have you swallowed your own opinion to avoid conflict? And in the end, Did it help? Being nice all the time is giving up your own space in the world. It is allowing others to dictate your actions. It is, in essence, giving up the leadership of your own life. And that's why we need to question this myth. Not to become insensitive, but to understand that firmness, when used well, is an act of responsibility, not only towards others, but especially towards yourself. In the next chapter, we'll explore this silent cost of trying to please everyone in more depth, because even outside of leadership positions, it takes a heavy toll, emotional, mental, and even physical. The hidden price of pleasing everyone. You don't have to be a leader to suffer the consequences of trying to please everyone. This behavior is present in the details of everyday life, in small decisions, in uncomfortable silences, and in the concessions we make without realizing it. The problem is that over time it adds up, and the price can be very high. You may not realize it right away, but when you say yes when you mean no, you're actually saying no to yourself. You're putting someone else's needs above your own. And it seems small until it becomes routine, until you realize that you're living everyone else's agenda but your own. The first cost is emotional. Constantly pleasing others creates constant internal tension. You live worried about what others think, whether you are being accepted, whether they will like you. This mental vigilance wears you down, and what begins as an effort to keep the peace ends up as an invisible battlefield within you. Then comes the psychological cost. When you sacrifice yourself to be accepted, you are sending your brain a silent message. My opinion doesn't matter. My boundaries are negotiable. I am only valuable when I am useful to others. This repetition undermines self-esteem. It creates a cycle of emotional dependence where your value always seems to be in someone else's hands. There is also a practical cost. When you try to please everyone, you waste time, energy, and focus. You fail to invest in your own projects, avoid important conversations, and procrastinate on necessary decisions. And the most ironic thing, the people you are trying to please probably don't do the same for you. And finally, there is the relational cost. Because when you try to be everything to everyone, you stop being authentic. And relationships that are not built on authenticity have an expiration date. Sooner or later, someone realizes that you are just playing a role. Machiavelli warned us about this indirectly, when he said that a ruler needed to maintain the appearance of virtue but know how to act harshly when necessary. He was not encouraging falsehood. He was telling us that life is often a balancing act, that being virtuous is not the same as being vulnerable, and that protecting oneself is not selfishness, it is wisdom. You have the right to say no without feeling guilty, to take a firm stand without having to justify each choice, to not please someone and still be a good person, because pleasing everyone is not a virtue. It's submission disguised as kindness, and this is perhaps one of the greatest lessons we can learn from a mature reading of Machiavelli, the courage to displease when necessary to keep one's truth intact. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt like you were putting yourself down just to keep the peace, share it in the comments. Your story may help other people realize that they're not alone in this process. In the next chapter, we'll start to turn the tide. Now that you understand the burden of trying to please everyone, it's time to discover how to apply practical strategies inspired by Machiavelli to live with more authenticity and strength. The 5 Machiavellian strategies for an authentic and assertive life. By now, you've understood the risks of living to please others. You've seen how this attitude, often fueled by good intentions, can cost you your freedom, your self-respect, and even your inner peace. Now it's time to take a step forward. Machiavelli didn't just describe the world as it is. He also suggested ways to navigate it intelligently. And even if you're not trying to conquer a kingdom, the strategies he proposed are still extremely useful for achieving something even more important: control over your own life. Here are 5 Machiavellian strategies, adapted to our times, to help you live more authentically without giving up strength and clarity. 1. Understand the intentions behind people's actions. One of Machiavelli's most powerful lessons is that human beings do not always act out of nobility. Often we are driven by self-interest, fear, a desire for status or advantage. This is not pessimism, it is realism. You don't need to become paranoid, but you do need to be vigilant. When someone asks you for a favor, proposes something, or reacts unexpectedly, ask yourself, what does this person really want? Looking beyond the words is the first step to avoiding being manipulated. Understanding the logic behind other people's behavior protects you from empty promises and one-sided relationships. 2. Use silence as a strategic tool. Machiavelli understood the power of image, and often the strongest image you can convey is one of calm. In a noisy world, silence is a gesture of strength. You don't have to justify everything all the time, or respond right away. Learn to listen more. When you master silence, you avoid impulsive reactions, preserve your energy, and force the other person to deal with their own anxiety. Silence used well conveys control, confidence, and presence. 3. Set boundaries without apologizing. If there's one thing that weakens any relationship, it's the lack of clear boundaries. People who can't say no end up becoming free territory and, eventually, resentful. Machiavelli would say that a ruler who does not impose authority ends up losing the respect of the people. In personal life, this is no different. It is not about being rude, but about being firm. You do not need to justify yourself for prioritizing your time, your energy, and your mental health. Saying that doesn't work for me is an act of self-respect, and the sooner you set those boundaries, the more natural they become, and the more people will respect them. 4. Choose your battles wisely. Not every argument deserves your attention. Not every criticism demands a response. One of the most common mistakes people make when seeking acceptance is to get into arguments to prove themselves, when in fact, silence or distancing themselves would be more effective. Machiavelli knew that resources are limited. Time, energy, and reputation need to be preserved. Fighting every battle wears you down and takes your focus away from what really matters. So learn to ask yourself, is this worth my peace? Is this aligned with my values? Or am I just trying to be accepted? Choosing your battles is a sign of strategic maturity and a smart way to maintain personal power. 5. Seek respect before acceptance. This is perhaps the central point of this entire transformation. Most people want to be loved, admired, and accepted, but many forget that respect comes first, and that without it, any acceptance is superficial. Machiavelli argues that a ruler must, above all, maintain his authority. In other words, who you are and what you stand for must be clear from the outset. This does not mean isolating yourself or being inflexible, but rather acting with conviction. Respect comes from consistency. When your actions reflect your values, you attract people who recognize your strength and distance yourself from those who are only interested in convenience. These 5 strategies don't require coldness or malice. They require attention, courage, and awareness. They don't push away the people who really matter. On the contrary, they filter connections, strengthen genuine bonds, and protect you from toxic dynamics. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to apply all of this in practice in even more depth through the concept of strategic authenticity, the point where truth and intelligence meet. Strategic authenticity, the power of truth without naivety. Authenticity has become a buzzword. Everyone wants to be authentic, to live their truth, to express themselves freely. But there is a problem here. Many people confuse authenticity with impulsiveness. They think that being authentic means saying everything they think, opening up completely, ignoring any filter or strategy. And this, in practice, can be as dangerous as living to please others. Machiavelli would never condemn authenticity as long as it was accompanied by strategy. For him, showing your essence is not a weakness as long as you know when, how, and to whom to show it. And that is where the concept of strategic authenticity comes from. Being strategically authentic means consciously choosing which parts of yourself to reveal and in what contexts. It means knowing that not everyone deserves access to your most intimate side. It means living your truth without naivety. Think of it like building a fortress. You decide which gates to open to whom and at what times. And that's not fakery, it's wisdom. Because your emotional energy is a valuable resource, and your truth shouldn't be handed over to just anyone who shows up smiling. Strategic authenticity is also the art of aligning what you think, feel, and do, but do it intelligently. For example, you might be angry with someone, but you choose to wait for the right moment to talk. You might disagree with something at work, But you choose to speak up when it has real impact. You don't hold back. You act with intention. Machiavelli teaches us that the world is not a fair place all the time. And if you want to maintain your integrity, you need to learn to protect your truth. And that starts with the awareness that showing everything to everyone all the time is a way of making yourself vulnerable for no reason. Being strategically authentic doesn't mean being calculating. It means being mature. It means understanding that your emotions are valid, but they don't need to dominate you. That your opinion matters, but it doesn't need to be shouted. That your essence is powerful, but it can and should be guarded with discretion. True power comes when you don't have to prove anything to anyone, when you know who you are and act from that inner center, even if others don't understand right away. When your firmness and your truth walk hand in hand. And perhaps most importantly, living with strategic authenticity attracts the right kind of people. People who respect your boundaries, who value your clarity, and who don't expect you to pretend to be something you're not. Those are the connections that are truly worth having. If this content makes sense to you, please like the video. This shows that you value this type of reflection and helps me to continue bringing topics that go beyond the superficial. Free yourself from the obligation to always be good you. No longer have to be held back by the obligation to always be good. You don't have to walk on eggshells, trying to be nice, friendly, understanding all the time. The truth is that being good, in the sense that society demands, often means being docile. And being too docile is giving up your own strength. What Machiavelli teaches us, deep down, is that living strategically is not living coldly. It is living consciously. It is getting out of autopilot mode. It is understanding that pleasing everyone is not a sign of virtue, but of lack of control. Being truly good is being whole. It's knowing how to be firm when necessary. It's protecting what matters. It's saying no without guilt. It's putting your truth above the temporary approval of others. If this video touched a part of you that was dormant, if you saw yourself in an example or felt like something finally made sense, then you're ready to start doing things differently. And if you want to continue this journey with me, subscribe to the channel now. Here we will continue exploring ideas that challenge, provoke, and liberate. A strategic mind is a free mind.